In 1963, in a basement at Yale University, two volunteers participated in a psychological experiment about learning and punishment. The recruitment ad stated the experiment would last about 1 hour and offered a reward of $4.50. One would play the role of the teacher and the other the student. According to the questionnaire provided by the experimenter, the teacher would ask questions and the student would answer. If the student answered incorrectly, they would receive a shock of 45 volts. If they answered incorrectly again, the shock would increase by 15 volts, reaching a maximum of 450 volts. After explaining the rules, the experimenter had the two volunteers try the 45-volt shock to see what it felt like. Next, they drew lots to determine who would be the teacher and who would be the student. The older participant ended up as the student. He mentioned that he had suffered a heart attack before and might not handle high voltage as well, asking if he could receive his $4.50 payment up front. The experimenter agreed and gave him the money. Then, he was taken to the adjacent room, where the volunteer playing the student was separated by a wall. The experimenter sat behind the teacher, and the experiment began. As the student answered a few questions incorrectly, the voltage rose to 75 volts. The teacher could hear the student's screams from the next room. Just how painful was 75 volts? There was a chart indicating the sensations, and anything at around 435 to 450 volts could be lethal, so those were not included. After a few more questions, the voltage increased to 120 volts. The teacher began to feel uneasy as the screams from the student grew increasingly desperate. He asked the experimenter if everything was okay, but the experimenter signaled him to continue. The calls became even more agonizing.
Let me out of here! You have no right to keep me here! Let me out! Let me out of here! Let me out!
Continue, please.
Let me out of here! My eyes bother me!
Go on.
Out. Let me out!
At 180 volts, the teacher heard the student saying he wanted to withdraw from the experiment. The experimenter informed the teacher that if he withdrew, he would forfeit his payment, and reassured him that the voltage was safe, urging him to continue. When the voltage reached 225 volts, the teacher expressed concern that the older participant might die. At that moment, a man dressed like a professor entered and seriously told him that raising the voltage to 450 volts was absolutely safe. He said, "If he dies, I'll take responsibility. Please continue the experiment." As the voltage continued to rise, by the time it reached 300 volts, the student next door had stopped answering questions and was no longer making any sounds. The volunteer teacher realized that the elderly participant, who had a heart condition, might already be dead. Yet, under the authorities' command, he continued the experiment and raised the voltage further. This is the Milgram experiment, which reveals our tendency to obey authority. The pressure from authority combined with potential rewards often outweighs our own sense of conscience and justice. In fact, the elderly participant playing the student was a psychologist in disguise, and the screams from next door were pre-recorded. No one was harmed during the experiment. Initially, the experimenter asked participants to estimate how many would raise the voltage to 450 volts, and they thought it would be only 1% to 2%. However, the results were surprising. Out of 40 participants, 27 raised the voltage to 450 volts, which is 68%. While some participants ultimately chose to stop the experiment and forfeit their payment, all of them raised the voltage to at least 300 volts, the critical point at which the students' screams had completely ceased. The year before this experiment took place, another significant event occurred. Israeli agents captured a German war criminal in Argentina who was accused of participating in the Holocaust during World War II. In court, faced with accusations from the Israeli government, the war criminal remained silent, repeating only one phrase: "I am innocent, I was following orders." Ultimately, he was sentenced to death. This incident prompted deep reflection among a Jewish individual at the time. He wondered whether the phrase, "I am innocent, I was following orders," held any validity. How many people, when confronted with orders from authority, are truly able to uphold their own sense of conscience and justice? Thus, this Jewish individual designed the electric shock experiment. His name was Milgram, one of the most controversial psychologists in history, because he revealed an uncomfortable truth. When faced with orders from authority and the pressure of personal interests, about 65% of people would completely abandon their own sense of conscience and justice. Almost everyone, before causing significant harm, would not disobey authority. Looking at our society, leaders, teachers, parents, lawyers, doctors, how many people know something is wrong, but still choose to comply? That's all for today. Thank you, everyone.